President Donald Trump threatens to permanently end all funding to the World Health Organization. The Venezuelan government presents new evidence of links between opposition groups, U.S. and Colombia, to destabilize the government. And France records 70 new cases of COVID-19 in schools that were allowed to reopen last week. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the South. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to permanently end all funding to the World Health Organization if it did not, quote, commit to substantive improvement within the next 30 days. In a letter posted on Twitter, President Trump criticized the UN body's coronavirus response, saying the only way forward is if the WHO can actually demonstrate independence from China. The WHO declared the coronavirus outbreak to be a global health emergency on January 30th, its highest level of alert at a time when there were fewer than 100 cases outside of China. Meanwhile, China has pledged to donate $2 billion towards fighting the coronavirus and dispatch doctors and medical supplies to Africa and other countries in the developing world. The contribution, to be spent over 2 years, amounts to more than twice what the U.S. had been given the global health emergency before President Trump cut off American funding last month.
The U.S. tries to use China as an issue to shirk responsibility and bargain over its international obligations to the WHO. This is a miscalculation, and the U.S. has picked the wrong target. The U.S. leader's open letter you mentioned is full of hints, perhaps some maybes, and tries to use suspicious methods to mislead the public and achieve the goal of smearing China's antivirus efforts and shirk responsibility for the United States' own insufficient response. This is futile.
Venezuela's Health Minister Carlos Alvarado thanked the solidarity of the World Health Organization and the cooperation of China by providing medical supplies needed to battle the COVID-19 pandemic in the Bolivarian nation.
We thank humanitarian cooperation in solidarity of the World Health Organization and the United Nations system, China, Russia, Cuba, Iran, and other international organizations.
Alvarado also reiterated condemnations on unilateral coercive measures imposed by the U.S. government that create difficulties for Venezuela to acquire health supplies.
It is necessary to reiterate our rejection of the crime being committed against the Venezuelan people through unilateral coercive measures, which have kidnapped our people and through which they have stolen over $30 billion, bank accounts frozen in the United States and Europe, generating difficulty in purchasing food and medicines.
Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez offered an update on the number of coronavirus cases in the country. Let's have a look.
In the last 24 hours, 77 new cases have been detected, increasing the total number of COVID-19 cases in Venezuela to 618. 83% of these are imported. Out of the 77 new cases, 64 are imported cases, which represents 83% of the total. 47 arrived from Colombia, 44 entered through Táchira, 1 entered through Amazonas State, 1 entered through Zulia State, and 1 entered through Apure State. 4 others came from Brazil. They entered through the border post of Bolivar State. 8 came from Ecuador, and 8 entered through the border post of Táchira State, and 5 from Peru. They returned to Venezuela on the May 8th flight.
The Venezuelan government has revealed new evidence that directly links opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó to a document signed with U.S. security company Silvercorp USA. Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez announced the opposition lawmaker for continuously attacking national sovereignty and promoting foreign intervention. Rodriguez revealed more evidence that demonstrates the close relationship between U.S. President Donald Trump, Colombian President Iván Duque, and extremist Venezuelan opposition opposition groups linked to Colombian drug traffickers. The Venezuelan vice president stressed that they continue to conspire against the country.
That's the criminal triangle that includes the U.S. administration, that includes Duque's government, that includes Juan Guaidó and his henchmen, and also includes notorious Colombian drug lords and at least one Venezuelan drug trafficker.
We'll be right back, don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. The recent resignation of several experts in Peru have called into question the credibility of the Medical Specialist Advisory Committee assembled by the Health Ministry to address the COVID-19 pandemic. The latest resignation was the sixth submitted in recent days. The coordinator of the intensive care unit at the Guillermo Almenara Hospital, Dr. Rosa Lopez, said that her decision was based on the large number of doctors infected with COVID-19 due to a lack of protection and the false figures offered by the government on the number of cases. Peru is the second hardest hit nation in Latin America with almost 100,000 cases and over 2,000 fatalities according to official reports. The Brazilian Ministry of Health reported on Sunday that the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in the country had surpassed 240,000. According to the latest report, the virus has killed over 16,000 people in Brazil. The state of Sao Paulo, one of the worst hit in the country, now has more than 60,000 cases and nearly 5,000 deaths. So the Municipal Health Bureau of the state capital announced on Sunday that there had been a 400% increase in COVID-19 deaths from April 9th to May 15th and warned that the public health system could collapse within 15 days unless stricter quarantine and social distancing measures were adopted. The country now ranks 5th in the world in terms of the number of cases. Pressure is mounting on the Brazilian president as calls for his impeachment continue. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Muir, has more.
The death toll for coronavirus has just surpassed 16,000 in Brazil, and there's more and more pressure on far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro to resign, and more pressure on Congress to impeach him. On Friday, the PT party filed its first impeachment request with Congress, along with two other left-wing parties and a group of 200 civil society organizations, including social movements, professional organizations, and labor unions. The reason that the PT took so long to act is because it's worried about what will happen if Bolsonaro is really taken out of office, because his vice president is a military general, and this could seemingly return Brazil to something similar to the era of the military dictatorship. There's already 8 military generals serving as cabinet ministers for Bolsonaro and over 1,300 military officers serving in the executive branch of the government. The government's already been militarized. So the other strategy of the PT has been to work to cancel the 2018 presidential elections for fraud. And a new revelation has come out which looks like the chances of this actually happening could be stronger now. As reported in Brazil de Fato, it's just been revealed that the federal police deliberately suppressed information about one of the members of Jair Bolsonaro's son Flavio's cabinet in the State Congress of Rio de Janeiro, performing money laundering operations for paramilitary organized crime groups called militias. What's come out is that the federal police in Rio de Janeiro hid this information from the press until after the elections to help Bolsonaro's chances at winning the presidency. His popularity rating is still at 27%, so the PT is working at the base level with its partners in the social movements and the labor unions and church groups to reduce his support under 20%. At that moment, they think an impeachment can successfully move forwards.
We thank our correspondent Brian Muir for that report. Social organizations in Ecuador have taken to the streets to protest against the government and its austerity measures during the pandemic. Workers, students, and other organizations protested in the capital, Quito, against a new law approved by the National Assembly. They reject that the law includes a dismissal of labor laws that protected workers from massive layoffs. They also rejected recent cuts in education.
University students have come here to protest yet again to demand the resignation of the Finance Minister Richard Martinez for authorizing the cuts to education across the country, despite the fact that it was prohibited by the Constitutional Court. We are also showing support to workers and reject the 2 new laws approved to allow layoffs. We will continue fighting until the government returns education funds.
Meanwhile, the former director of risk assessment, Alexandra Ocles, has given her statement during a trial against her for alleged corruption. She's accused of approving an overpriced government food aid program for those affected by the lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This adds to several authorities from the Lenin Moreno government under investigation for profiting off the pandemic. Moving on to Bolivia, protesters in the city of El Alto blocked the main highway to demand food and democratic elections in the country. The protesters were demanding that the de facto government steps down and allows the country to hold elections immediately. They have accused it of failing to address the social and economic challenges the people are facing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our correspondent Freddy Morales has more on the situation in El Alto.
We're in District 7 of the city of El Alto on the highway that connects to cities in the border with Peru. The neighbors here are demanding that the government gives them permission so that most business can operate and people can return to work. These are small business owners and they want authorities to ease restrictions after more than 50 days under lockdown. They say they have run out of money. They're also demanding a legitimate government, meaning an election in the next 90 days. Also, a dozen workers and campesino associations have declared their communities in emergency. They're also denouncing acts of corruption by the government, the lack of COVID-19 testing kits, and UDI equipments for hospitals. There are also blockades in Cochabamba and in Potosí.
We thank Freddy Morales for that report. Meanwhile, mass protests have rocked Haiti on what would have been their National Flag Day celebrations. Police and armored patrol vehicles were deployed to quell hundreds of demonstrators using tear gas to disperse the crowd. Protesters are upset over fuel shortages, high inflation, and alleged corruption. They are also accusing the government of using COVID-19 as a smokescreen to continue what they call their illegal occupation of office and to discourage people from mobilizing. At least 20 civilians have been killed in a Boko Haram attack in a village northeast of Nigeria. According to security officials, the attackers invaded the village in several pickup trucks and fired rocket-propelled grenades on homes in Gaji Ghana village. Boko Haram fighters have been targeting the area for the past 10 years and more than 36,000 people have been killed in the insurgencies.
The Boko Haram started shooting sporadically before reaching the military camp. The aircraft arrived and fired them back. As a result, they just engaged in shooting sporadically into town. Up to now, we have evacuated about 25 people and we buried about 12. We cannot specify the figures left behind, but for these people, we brought them for an immediate treatment.
Campaigning for Burundi's general election goes into full swing. General Evariste Ndayishimiye will be the ruling party's candidate, replacing outgoing President Pierre Nkurunziza. The elections will be held on Wednesday. In Lesotho, a new premier will be sworn in on Tuesday after the Prime Minister's party accepted his resignation. The Albosatho Convention accepted the decision after Thomas Tabane said he was stepping down following months of pressure. He is accused of murdering his former wife in 2017, 2 days before he was sworn in as Prime Minister. Cuban doctors who are in South Africa to help the country fight COVID-19 have started working in various hospitals. The first group has already arrived in the Northwest Province, while the other medical experts are still finalizing operation and training in the South African situation before being deployed to other health facilities in the country.
Of the 13 healthcare professionals, 8 are family physicians. Of the family physicians, 4 is allocated to the Bajanala districts and 2 to the Kenneth Kaunda district and 1 each to the RSM and NMM district. In Bajanala district, being the epicenter of our epidemic in Northwest Province, they will be distributed between the Rustenburg area and the Madibeng sub-district.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us. Welcome back. President Vladimir Putin was forced to intervene personally in Russia's North Caucasus region of Dagestan, as local officials describe the coronavirus situation there as a catastrophe. For several days now, there have been rumors of mounting fatalities that overwhelmed hospitals and local medical staff have taken to social media to make frantic appeals.
In recent days, the region's healthcare system has been under heavy pressure, despite the dedicated effort of doctors and nurses, and the number of tragic outcomes has been increasing, including among medical workers themselves.
But the problem is that these are only recorded cases of death in hospitals. Nobody keeps statistics of people who die from disease in their homes. They die, they are buried according to customs, and no one counts them.
Following the long-awaited formation of a new Israeli government, the European Union urged the Islamic Republic to avoid unilateral steps in the West Bank at the conclusion of a video conference on EU foreign affairs ministers. EU Foreign Minister Josep Borrell stated that any unilateral decision that will lead to the annexation of any occupied Palestinian territory will represent a violation of international law. Borrell, who congratulated the formation of the new Israeli government, stated he will support and facilitate negotiations between Israel and Palestine, adding that the European Union won't recognize any changes to 1967 borders unless agreed upon by Israelis and Palestinians. France has recorded 70 new cases of COVID-19 in schools that were allowed to reopen last week as part of the easing of restriction measures. France's Education Minister Jean-Michel Blanquer said that the 70 cases were a small proportion of the 1.4 million school children who have returned. He said the affected schools would be closed immediately. France closed its schools and higher education institutes from March 17th as part of the country's measures to contain the country's coronavirus outbreak. The government of the United Kingdom announced the COVID-19 death toll has reached almost 35,000.
408 people are currently in hospital with coronavirus, which is down 13% from this time last week. And I'm very sad to report that of those who have tested positive for COVID-19 across all settings, 34,796 have now died. And that's an increase of 160 deaths on yesterday.
In the U.S., workers in the sanitary sector in New Orleans have gone on strike to demand personal protective equipment and hazard pay amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Garbage collectors are demanding paid sick leave, $15 per hour hazard pay, and a written agreement from their employer stipulating that it will ensure safety measures according to Phase 1 guidelines. The workers say they are not going to back down the protest, which they started early this month, until their demands are fully met.
My name is Quest. I'm with the New Orleans Workers Group. We are a group of workers who believe and know from the core of us that only the collective organizing of workers is going to liberate us from this oppressive white supremacist capitalist system. We understand that capitalism finds a way to trickle its way into all corners and pockets and nooks and crannies of our society, of our economy, of our being. That you can, yes, also be a black capitalist and exploit black workers. And that's a bit of what brought us out here today. We stand in solidarity with the City Waste Union. We are proud of these brothers, proud of these men, these fathers, these essential frontline workers, these heroes of our community who have been paving the path to a pandemic.
Italy has lifted most of the coronavirus restrictions for the first time after 2 months of the lockdown. Various businesses, churches, and recreational facilities that have been permitted to open with a strict requirement to adhere to safety rules. Italy is one of the countries worst affected by the pandemic, but is following other European nations who have eased restrictions that were applied to curb the pandemic.
I've been used to going to church since I was a little girl, and after all that silence, which has become almost a spiritual silence, one feels the need to find a spiritual breath.
Morocco will extend its state of emergency until June 10th, according to its Moroccan Prime Minister.
Since our country has chosen from the outset to give priority to the preservation of the health of its citizens and to put it above all other considerations, and since we have made a lot of progress so far, and in order to preserve this progress, both in terms of epidemics and health, it has been decided to extend the state of health emergency and to extend the lockdown for a period of 3 weeks.
Forces of the Libyan Government of National Accord have captured the strategic Al-Watiya air base from fighters loyal to General Khalifa Haftar. Military spokesman Mohammed Nunu posted on his Twitter account that GNA forces had taken over the entire base near the Tunisian border and seized large quantities of ammunition belonging to Haftar fighters. Japan's economy has gone into a recession due to the coronavirus crisis. According to the Japanese government, the gross domestic product shrank by 3.4% in the January-March period from the previous quarter. Japan was less affected by the virus compared to other developed economies, with just over 16,000 cases and around 750 deaths. But as the pandemic hit the global economy, the country's exports were among the worst affected, falling by 6% compared to the previous quarter. China is taking strict measures to control the spread of COVID-19 after new local cases were detected in the past few weeks, raising alarms on a possible second wave of infections.
China is driving the resumption of school and economic activities, but the fears of a second wave of COVID-19 contagion have also increased. After the resurgence of local infection cases of the new coronavirus in the provinces of Jilin and Heilongjiang in the northeast of the country and in the city of Wuhan, this has forced the authorities to reactivate the emergency levels.
In response to the infection rates, the provinces of Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Hubei, the Joint Prevention and Control Mechanism of the Council of States, and the National Health Commission have recently sent out guidelines for the prevention and control of the pandemic in all local communities.
In order to stop the spread of the disease and maintain what has been achieved until now in the battle against the new coronavirus, China has announced new radical measures. All 11 million residents of Wuhan will undertake the nucleic acid test, and the quarantine was restored in several regions of Jilin and Heilongjiang.
We are conducting nucleic acid tests for all residents, which is a huge task in terms of social mobilization and organization. The main goal is to further identify the scope of the epidemic, to detect the virus in a proactive way, and intensify monitoring and detection.
Other actions to avoid new contagions will be maintained, including temperature controls, the use of a mask, the requirement of presenting digital health codes, among others.
Here in the city, we give prevention measures, especially to return to work. It is very important to be safe, and that is why we use masks, we apply social distance, and the disinfection of the areas.
After more than 84,000 cases and almost 5,000 deaths, China takes a first step towards normality, but without abandoning prevention measures and seeking by all ways to avoid a second wave. The experiences of China can serve other nations that are now beginning the reopening after overcoming the worst stage of the outbreak.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media as well. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.